Hi, this is Clayton. Just wanted to say, hope you're having a great morning. We're going to start our new and fresh, the future of international business, and it's being moderated by the phenomenal Alisa Gus, who's been our MVP in the last 30 days from WishKnish, and just so excited to have her. Unmute yourself, Gus, because you're going to go ahead and get your panel going. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for all of the speakers. I see you, Tobias. I see you, Samira. And it's just great to see all of this happening. So I'll turn it over to you, Gus, and let's see what happens.
Okay. Well, Clayton, I did warn you. I'm liable to have things go kabloom, but let's go with this and see what happens. Tobias, Samira, thanks for being here. And let me just get us started on what we're going to be grilling you about. So I'm here with these two amazing panelists to bring up something we don't usually talk about. And, that's businesses doing the right thing. In January of this year, over 3,000 businesses and government leaders have come together in Davos, Switzerland, to discuss just how we can meet the UN sustainability goals for 2030 and the role of government, big business, and individuals within their communities in making those goals a reality. Around that time, there's been a lot of hope and excitement around the initiatives and resolutions unveiled at the conference. The future looked bright. And then COVID-19 became a global pandemic, and our focus has shifted to survival rather than meeting those lofty ideals. But the reasons behind the 17 interlocking goals designed to make the world a better, fairer place remain, now more than ever. And so it is really up to us to define how we may advance humanity and find a way to move forward as we rebuild what was lost in the pandemic and hopefully build it better. Now, after all, if this hasn't given us a demonstration of what it's like when supply chains break down, when food lines extend for blocks to the depleted food banks, when kids and women are being abused at home and have nowhere to turn because they have no way to venture out safely, well, what will? Before, those SDG goals were a suggestion, something we did perhaps because everyone else around us was committing to meeting them. Now we've had a taste of what it's like when we don't do our part. And my panelists are here to speak specifically about how they and their companies are doing their part to not just meet but exceed 2030 goals. And the best part is they have been added since before COVID hit. So in addition to appreciating what's at stake, they actually have the experience to back it up. With this, it is my pleasure to introduce Samira Khan, Global Impact Investment Lead at Salesforce.org, one of the impact arms of Salesforce, and Tobias Maier, the CFO for the Middle East and Africa and for DHL, Global Forwarding, as well as the CEO for Middle East and Africa at their internal startup called Saludo. So I want to make this dynamic panel. And so first of all, I'll let them say hi, introduce themselves, and then I'll start us off with the first question. Samira?
Hi, everyone. Samira Khan. I'm from Salesforce.org, and Salesforce.org is one of the social impact business centers at Salesforce.com. Thank you so much for having me today. As mentioned, I work on the Global Impact Engagement team, and our charter and our focus is on impact management. So how do we ourselves better measure and manage our impact, and then how do we enable our other organizations and partners to do the same? I'm excited to be here. I think it'll be an interesting, robust discussion, yet at the same time, probably a somber discussion because of the times that we're currently in. Helping vulnerable populations, harder to reach communities is a passion of mine, and I would love to sort of work with the community to further that goal. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Samira. Tobias?
Yeah, good morning, good evening, everybody. My name is Tobias. I'm based in Dubai. Many thanks, Lisa, for inviting me, and really amazing event so far. Was really quite an experience to meet the godfather of the internet, and really amazing to see what Silicon is doing in New York. I just hope one day we'll see something happening like a Silicon Africa, because I think there's much more communities out there who really need help. Our purpose at DHL is connecting people, improving lives. We are not doing it via technology in the basic sense, but we are ensuring that the goods are flowing and that the medicines arrive with people, and that all over the world. I'm since 5 years working across Africa and the Middle East. I was based in Johannesburg before, now I'm based in Dubai. It's demanding times, but yeah, we really love to see how technology can help get more out of technology and at the same time drive sustainability. It is a core of our strategy. It's something we started already in 2007. We are on a good track to become totally carbon neutral, and we want to really make the world a better place.
Well, that's exactly what we're here to talk about. So how do you see big businesses, not just your own, but overall, in terms of bringing positive change for a change? There's been so much discussion about how businesses destroy the environment, how they're encroaching on government structures, but there are businesses who are doing the right thing. So how exactly do you see the role of them changing with this global pandemic? And is the change here to stay? Especially now when the profit margins are so historically low. How do you actually balance the convergence between making a profit and making a difference? Why don't you start with this, Tobias?
Yeah, I think for me, what you can see, and I'm engaged in different European government organizations. I'm, meeting various decision makers and stakeholders. But what is becoming very, very clear is that investors and the agenda of investors is moving much more towards sustainable investments. If you don't have a clear agenda on ESG, economical, society, government, you will struggle to attract capital in future. And I think that is really very, very encouraging. There's an issue with there is not yet a common standard. So if you look at pure financials, if you look at balance sheets and P&Ls, we have global standards and we work towards them. But if you look at everything we do for societies, how we give work for people, how we give perspective to people, how we train people, the impact we have on the economies, the impact we have, for example, to fighting corruption, that is not systematically measured yet. There is no global standard today. I'm very, very confident that will develop in the next couple of years. And then, the companies who are not able and willing to contribute, they will be left behind and will naturally not be in business. Because I think the business is there to also serve societies and make the world better.
Samira, what have you noticed? I know you're working with a lot of companies, likely like the DHL. So what have you seen changing?
Yeah, I wanted to sort of reference your introduction. So one of the things that you mentioned is the Sustainable Development Goals and how lofty sort of they are and how difficult they can be to achieve. So even prior to the pandemic, we were already behind on the Sustainable Development Goals, already behind on outcomes with regards to health, education, workforce development. So given that we were already behind and then we got hit by a pandemic, a racial justice crisis, you've seen this sort of climate change dialogue, we're even further behind. So I think it's a much more sort of difficult challenge. It has been particularly difficult for vulnerable populations. You referenced, I believe, women and the responsibility they've had to take on at home, distance learning, and its inaccessibility to people in harder to reach communities and inner cities, health outcomes with pre-existing conditions. So long story short, I think things have become a lot more difficult and worse with the pandemic, and we are even at risk of being further behind. So it makes the role of corporations all the more important when there are gaps to be filled at the public sector and government level. This was already happening before. So I think where the inflection point is to what Tobias said, there's a growing momentum and recognition and conversation that we did not do what we were supposed to do prior to all of these crises, and we need to double down and do it now. So as a result of that, I think you're seeing more social innovation. You're seeing companies leapfrog and invest more in the Sustainable Development Goals, in social outcomes, and it's important to hold themselves accountable, so they're also sort of driving the impact management agenda further as well. So I think that is something that you have seen. But as you can imagine, this is only feasible in a pandemic for corporations that had already been committed, like Salesforce. Mark Benioff likes to refer to business as a platform for change. So we have truly tried to use our own company as a platform for change. We took our underlying CRM, our consumer slash customer relationship management platform, or it can also be called a constituent relationship management platform, and we modified it and created sort of a bundle of products, work.com, that is helping organizations in the medium term as well as in the long term get back to work safely and do their business. We've doubled down on investments in our supply chain and going back and looking sort of at our value chain. Our grant making has shifted a little bit. We just sort of rolled out an expansion of our impact investment fund. So there's so many different assets that we've brought together to bear on the pandemic and to help various stakeholders, whether they be our employees, whether they be sort of our investors and our other stakeholders, our customers. So we're really trying our best, but I do think we need to be cognizant of the fact that not everyone is going to be able to do that, and especially small businesses and social enterprises. So I think the key really lies in us partnering better with our customers and partnering better with the communities to help problem solve together and fill in some of the capital and resource gaps together, which is much easier sort of said than done. And finally, I'll just say the impact management conversation and the fragmentation around it is getting better. There is more convergence around this desire to manage impact, but what we have to be careful of is that the standards we're using take everyone into consideration. The SDGs has two very important words associated with it, which is for all. And I think that sometimes gets missed in the current frameworks and conversations that we look at, despite the great momentum and the commitment of companies.
That's a great point, and that actually leads me to a question to Tobias. He mentioned that there is very few criteria and standards around sustainable development and the ESG goals. So have you actually been part of the discussions about really standardizing it, about bringing to bear, I guess, the successes and failures of previous organizations that were engaged in it? And how do you actually see all of this feeding into a global standard? And to that point, there is I think it's called Principles for Responsible Investment, the PRI group, with 2,200 investors signed in, 90 trillion under management. So have you seen them actually call for these kind of metrics as when you are following through on your own goals?
Yeah, I cannot talk about specific organization. I think that in general, the challenge is really that there are different organizations with different frameworks, different emphasis as well. I mean, some is more emphasis on environmental, climate change, and other subjects, other more on society, sustainability, training, upskilling of people, getting them out of poverty. I think it's something being developed. I think every big organization, I would be surprised if they wouldn't be working on it, and I truly hope that there will be a way to get to a standard. Of course, if you look at a company like ours, we have more than 550,000 employees across the whole world. For us, the impact on people is a huge subject, because we have 550,000 employees, makes 2-3 million people and their families depend on the income, the job they have. Whatever we do in terms of training and ensuring they get paid in time and they have a good job and they have a good experience at the job and they like to come to work, has an impact on many people on the planet. Other companies might be, if it's a chemical company, it might be more on the environment and the impact it has there, because they might have less people, but the factory and potentially what happens there might be more severe. So I think there's different focuses, there's different weighting on different sectors, but it would really, we'll have to see how it evolves and whether there will be a golden standard in the end or whether there will be a couple of key standards. In the end, it will also depend a lot on the investors and the investor communities and which standards they will use and apply to manage their portfolios.
Interesting, you mentioned that the investors having weight on informing those discussions. So do you feel it should be more government-centric? Should it be the standards that governments and potentially the UN impresses on the business community, or should it actually come from, sideways for what actually is proven to be successful, what proves to work, and I guess what proves to bring money. I mean, should the investors be the ones responsible for informing this conversation, or should it more come from the government level? Samira, what do you think?
Yeah,
Oh, it's
I
a
mean,
good question.
sorry. Go for it.
Okay.
All right, I'll go. Sorry about that. So basically, I think that is, as Tobias started saying, that's a good question. It's a carrot and a stick. I think both are important. I think it's very important to have policies in place that drive the conversation forward. Oftentimes, policy has led in the past, and even despite sort of consumer demand and investor demand, sometimes they're not quite getting there. So I think it's helpful to have the policy. I don't like to use this word, but I already mentioned it, sort of the stick element to it. At the same time, you need the demand, so the carrot. So investors asking for it, consumers asking for it. So I think you need both. And I think a great example of it would be sort of the EU and the way they have both the carrot and the stick sort of showing up and emerging right now. I think earlier you had asked if there was sort of a push in this direction. I think there's definitely a push, despite the fragmentation of standards, in reporting on non-financial or pre-financial reporting, because of the realization that things like human rights, things like health outcomes ultimately affect the business and the business performance. The devil is in the details. How do you actually show it? Do you have the internal resources and good data to actually show it? And I think as companies report on all of this more and more and bring it into sort of one place, there will naturally be sort of a greater conversation. You'll see more and more companies doing it. And that is in addition to, let's say, pressure from government or investors. So you'll see an internal push from employees, from consumers. They'll see more, they'll want more. And that's just sort of my leading hypothesis around it.
I love that. So, Tobias, did you also think about carrot and a stick, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's very similar from in my point of view. I think you have the governments and it should be in dialogue, but I think the governments will define a minimum legal playground which should be the same. But normally it should be the minimum, laws, and we don't break the laws, and that should be clear. I think investors, there's many people, but also at the end of the day, consumers. If it's transparent, this company is very responsible. And there is a standard to measure and say this company is more responsible than the other company. Consumers can decide whether they want to work and buy from this responsible company or from the more irresponsible company. And then consumers can make choices. And if the consumers choose the more responsible companies, investors will like it because the companies will have more business and will become more profitable. So I think at the end of the day, it's all of us. It's the whole society. And as investors and as consumers, we all contribute to that. So I think at the end of the day, I hope that common sense will prevail and will make this planet better all together, hand in hand.
Well, you actually mentioned that consumers have a role to play in informing this, but how do consumers actually know what the company does? I mean, yes, we can do some press releases, we can do, we can speak about having done a certain global good, but overall, I'm not sure the consumers are quite aware of what the company has done. And usually it's the bad that's spoken of more often than the good. So how would you want the consumers to be informed, and how would you actually convey your support and metrics for something that's really important globally and overall? And for that matter, how do we actually bring that in as part of the COVID-19 discussion? Because really right now, consumers need to rise up just as much as the companies do and help us shed the effects of what it has done. So why don't you just continue with that thought? How do we teach consumers about what role they play, and how do they learn about what you've already done that's for the greater good?
I think in today's reality, as you say, it's very product specific. It's very unique, and that is part of the challenge we just described, having the lack of a standard. So you cannot compare us against our competitors and say that company is more green than the other. We have specific products. I mean, classically in our industry, what we do is, we offset the carbon emissions of shipments, for example, making them carbon neutral. But that is then for a specific shipment, a specific product, but not as a company overall. The good thing is, I think, through internet, through the connectivity we all have today, The moment we reach a level where there is common standards and agreements on these standards, everybody will be very easily able to identify those good companies and compare them with the not so good companies. So I think the access to information, and I think that's something, key function of the internet, really will enable and help drive it once there is a clear assessment and comparing it. Today, yes, it's based on specific initiatives, specific products, specific marketing, if you wish, and hopefully that we'll see evolve and become really more fact-based, absolutely neutral, comparable, which is not an easy thing to do because it's many different dimensions and they are interlinked.
You know, I would love your thoughts, Samira, and also specifically with this slant towards a lot of consumers probably don't even know what Salesforce is, much less what it does, because it's something for B2B. So how do you actually balance that part on top of the original question?
Yeah, so I think in terms of just reporting on our standards, we put out every year a stakeholder impact report, Salesforce.com does, and that includes our contribution to education, our contribution to climate change, health, the commitments we've made. So it really illustrates that in addition to that, Salesforce.org, which is one of the social impact business centers at Salesforce, also puts out the Salesforce.org social impact report that has sort of highlight stories and findings from our community. So I think those reports are available if someone is so interested, and they are digestible. And some of the standards we report to, or a lot of the standards, are global reporting initiatives / GRI standards or other standard setters. And so in that way, you can sort of see what we're doing versus another company is doing. And as you mentioned, companies do also go out there with press releases on their website and whatnot. And some of those then bubble up to your average consumer because they attract attention. And in general, they tend to be either very positive, so a very strong, huge financial sort of commitment of people, a new product, or they tend to be, negative. We've seen, knock on wood, more positive than negative lately due to the investments we've been making as a result of the pandemic. I think it was mentioned that how important information is and access is. I think that is key. So I think the average consumer, they have access to these press releases, these rankings put out by third parties. They don't necessarily know what they mean and how to compare. But I think the more information and tools you make available to the average consumer, and if you make the outcomes transparent, like on, let's say, a website that has stories and that has outcomes, that has more comparative results, that would be very helpful. I've seen it done in a fragmented way. I haven't seen it yet done in a very holistic way. There's also, obviously, with the emergence of technology, new ways of looking at impact. I know there's AI-based solutions. There are those who are looking at net impact of products, net impact of companies based on the industries they fit in and what they produce, and are mining historical data around positive and negative impacts to kind of think about impact scores. So there are innovative approaches that are emerging because of technology that might make this easier in the future for the average consumer. And I missed it. You said there was one more add-on to the question. What was it that you specifically focused on?
So mostly the fact that Salesforce is a strictly, B2B
Oh,
play.
yes.
And so how do you actually incentivize the consumer to care about your company's contribution?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. So it's true that with B2B companies, they can be difficult to understand because your average consumer is not directly using them. About Salesforce, Salesforce has reached into a lot of different industries, a lot of big companies, a lot of medium and small businesses as well, or small and medium businesses as well, social enterprises, big nonprofits. So oftentimes people are hearing about and seeing Salesforce at their workplace. And so therefore they are very actually familiar with it, or we go out and we partner with the community around sort of causes that we care about. We do thought leadership. We really try to get out there into the community. So we're oftentimes partnering with our customers. And I think that really helps people sort of recognize who we are and what we do. And it's a combination of thought leadership and getting the word out there in partnership. So I think the key word is really this partnership and partnership with communities.
Well, I guess my last question, coming as a technologist into this as I do, what do you see as the role of technology in making that information available, in fact, informing the investment patterns, both for the investors in the government and for consumer behavior? Do you need the transparency that the technology brings, or are you mostly set and are just looking for standards to do the reporting? What's missing?
So, I mean, I can quickly take that because of the sort of technology play. Definitely need more transparency, not just standards. And I think technology certainly has a role to play in bringing the information and the knowledge to the surface against specific standards, but also as one looks across industries and across standards. I think you mentioned PRI earlier. If you look at impact investing, they're thinking about measuring impact differently because their incentives are often focused on return and on looking at impact in a particular way using specific methodologies. If you look at nonprofits, they're trying to garner funding. They're telling their stories sometimes differently. It's a very outcomes-based approach, usually based on what their logic model is or their mission is. And then if you look at companies, they're reporting to various standards. So I think there needs to be more cross-sector convergence around what does this impact really mean? What story is the data telling? And that requires there to be a greater investment in the actual data, in getting the data and cleaning the data and collecting the data. And going back to what I was saying, the technology has a role to play throughout that and then making it more transparent for the consumer. But what I was saying is a bit earlier is this sort of concept of for all. I think it's very important for all the players involved in anything around this to be cognizant of the fact that although you make the impact transparent, it doesn't necessarily mean it's comprehensive or it's sort of at the highest level of integrity. There could be a lot missing because of historical data, because of gaps in standards. So I think making those gaps clear as well and trying to fill them for all populations, all communities, even the harder to reach ones is important as we sort of make things more transparent.
That's actually a perfect answer. And before we close, Tobias, what do you think? Do we need to add anything to this?
No, I think it's standards is step one. Standards is step one. Then step two is technology to consistently measure and accurately measure. Just a simple example: if you move some cargo from somewhere in China to somewhere, say Chicago, it's a truck picking it up, driving it to the port. In the port, there's a crane putting it on a ship. Then there's a ship either directly going to the port in the US or perhaps with a transshipment stopping somewhere in between and loading it down, loading it on again. And then it's trucked the last kind of miles. And how do you then, know how much carbon emissions you produce in that shipment if you don't have technology to measure it? I think on a positive, perhaps closing remark, we've seen with COVID of what is possible. If you would have asked me in February that here in Dubai, all the planes would pretty much ground, I would have said it will never happen. So I think one of the positives is really that we've seen we as human beings, we as, world population, can react and we can take measures. And I really hope that we will learn and that we will learn and take measures early enough that we will realize what we're doing to the planet and that we are able and willing to take corrective measures before it's too late. So in technology there will be a great help and technology is used to measure temperatures, to measure pressures all over the world. We heard about the balloons earlier, what is possible today. And it's just amazing. And we should just use all this technology available to do the right things. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And Clayton, thanks for letting me talk to businesses that are doing the right thing. I was really excited when you asked me to moderate this and when you have suggested I speak to Tobias and Samira. No, they're the leaders that we're looking to help us save the planet and help us rebuild. So thanks for sharing your stories and your perspectives, and I look forward to working with all of you to make
Well, I appreciate it. First of all, I am a big fan of both of these people. Samira's on TV all the time, it's like, yeah. But anyway, it's just great to have both of you share your insight. It means a lot to us, and your companies are just phenomenal. So please stay in touch with us. We want to keep this going and have the conversation continue. There's been a lot of chat, questions, and everything from the audience, and we'll make sure that we share that with you moving forward. So again, thank you so much. And if there's anything we can do to support any of the initiatives that you're doing, please let us know. We are more than willing to be a part of what you're doing. So thank you, Alisa Gus, who's the MVP of connectivity. Anyone on this call, anyone who's on this meeting, you ought to go on LinkedIn and connect with all three of them. It's an amazing group of people.